Pearl Whitmore's cheeks burned with shame as the crowd in Evanston's town square jeered and pointed. The Wyoming Territory sun beat down mercilessly on her bowed head as she clutched her torn dress, the once prized blue fabric now stained with mud and humiliation on this spring day of 1878. Thief! Thief! Mayor Holloway's voice boomed across the square, his finger pointed accusingly at Pearl's trembling form. This woman was caught stealing from Hammond's general store. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can take what isn't rightfully theirs in our respectable town. Pearl couldn't lift her eyes from the dusty ground. At 22, she had never imagined finding herself in such a position, publicly shamed before the entire town of Evanston. Her family name, once respected despite their modest means, would now be forever tarnished. "I didn't steal anything," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of disapproval surrounding her. The truth that she had been falsely accused by Holloway's son after she'd rejected his advances would never be believed. The mayor's family held too much power in Evanston, and Pearl was merely the daughter of a widowed seamstress. "That's enough." A deep voice cut through the noise like a knife. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure approaching on horseback. Clint Sutherland sat atop his chestnut stallion, his eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. At 28, Clint had built a reputation as one of the most skilled ranchers in the territory, though he kept mostly to himself at his property outside of town. "Mayor Holloway, you've made your point," Clint said, his voice carrying authority despite its even tone. "The lady's been humiliated enough for one day, wouldn't you say?" The mayor's face reddened. "This isn't your concern, Sutherland. Justice must be seen. Justice." Clint dismounted in one fluid motion. "Or just a spectacle." His tall frame and broad shoulders seemed to grow even larger as he approached the platform where Pearl stood. "I know Miss Whitmore. Her mother mended my shirts just last week. They're good, honest folk." Pearl finally dared to look up, meeting Clint's steady gaze. There was something in those deep blue eyes that made her heart skip, not pity, but understanding. "Let me take her home," Clint said, not breaking eye contact with Pearl. "I think she's learned whatever lesson you intended." Mayor Holloway hesitated, clearly unhappy about having his authority challenged but unwilling to create conflict with one of the territory's most successful ranchers. "Fine," he finally spat. "Get her out of my sight. But if I catch her stealing again—" "You won't," Clint interrupted firmly. He extended his hand toward Pearl. "Miss Whitmore," with trembling fingers, Pearl accepted his offer, feeling the surprising gentleness in his calloused hand as he helped her down from the platform. The crowd began to disperse, though many still muttered disapprovingly. Clint led Pearl and his horse away from the square, waiting until they had turned down a quieter street before speaking. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now. Pearl shook her head, though her spirit felt bruised beyond measure. "Why did you help me? You hardly know me." Clint glanced down at her, sunlight catching in his sandy brown hair. "I know enough, and I know what it's like to be judged unfairly." They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the soft clopping of his horse's hooves on the dirt road and the distant bustle of town life. "I didn't steal anything," Pearl finally said, her voice barely audible. "I know. How could you possibly know that?" "Because I was in the store when it happened," Clint replied simply. "I saw Junior Holloway slip that ribbon into your basket when you weren't looking." I was about to speak up when he started shouting. Fresh tears sprang to Pearl's eyes. "Then why didn't you say something back there? You could have cleared my name," Clint sighed. "It would have been your word against the mayor's son, and mine, well, let's just say the Holloways and I have history. I figured getting you away from that mob was the first priority." They approached the small cabin at the edge of town where Pearl lived with her mother. The modest dwelling, with its carefully tended garden of vegetables and wildflowers, reflected the pride its inhabitants took in their humble home. "Thank you for walking me home," Pearl said stiffly, her dignity attempting to reassert itself. As they reached the gate, Clint unexpectedly took her hand. "Miss Whitmore, Pearl, I want you to know something." She looked up, surprised by the intensity in his expression. "Those people back there, they don't see you for who you really are, but I do." His voice grew gentle. "You shine, Pearl. Don't let them dim that light." The unexpected words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. No one had ever spoken to her with such certainty before. Before she could respond, the front door flew open and her mother rushed out. "Pearl, I heard what happened in town," Martha Whitmore said, her face etched with worry as she embraced her daughter. She then turned to Clint, gratitude evident in her expression. "Thank you for bringing her home, Mr. Sutherland." Clint tipped his hat. "Madam, Miss Whitmore's reputation is worth defending." "Would you join us for supper?" Martha offered. "It's the least we can do." Clint hesitated, his eyes meeting Pearl's. "I should get back to my ranch." But perhaps another time. Pearl found herself hoping there would indeed be another time. "Thank you again, Mr. Sutherland." "Clint," he corrected with a small smile. "And you're welcome, Pearl." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Pearl watched his retreating figure, his words echoing in her mind. "You shine." In that moment, despite the day's humiliation, something hopeful flickered to life inside her. Inside their modest cabin, Martha busied herself preparing tea while Pearl changed out of her soiled dress. "That Clint Sutherland," Martha mused as Pearl returned to the kitchen, now wearing a simple brown dress. "He's a good man, keeps to himself mostly but fair in his dealings." Pearl sank into a chair at their small wooden table. "He said he saw what really happened, that Junior Holloway planted that ribbon on me." Martha's hand stilled. "That doesn't surprise me. That boy has been trouble since he was knee-high." She placed a steaming cup of tea before her daughter. "What are you going to do?" Pearl stared into the amber liquid. "What can I do? It's my word against the mayor's son, and now half the town thinks I'm a thief." "The truth has a way of coming out," Martha said firmly, "and those who matter will stand by you." Pearl thought of Clint's words again. "He told me I shine," she said quietly, almost to herself. Martha smiled gently. "He's right about that. You always have." The next morning, Pearl steeled herself to face the town again. She had orders to deliver 3 mended shirts for Mr. Peterson at the bank, and a dress she and her mother had altered for Mrs. Landry. "Hold your head high," Martha advised as Pearl prepared to leave. "You've done nothing wrong." Pearl nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought of the whispers and stares that awaited her. She tucked the carefully wrapped parcels into her basket and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The walk to town felt interminable. Each step brought her closer to the judgment that surely waited. As she approached the main street, she noticed people glancing her way, conversations halting. A group of women outside the millinery shop whispered behind their hands, their eyes following her progress. Pearl fixed her gaze ahead, determined not to show how deeply their scrutiny wounded her. She had nearly reached the bank when she heard someone call her name. "Miss Whitmore." She turned to see Sarah Thompson, the schoolteacher, hurrying toward her. Pearl braced herself for more condemnation, but Sarah's expression held only concern. "I wanted to tell you how sorry I am about yesterday," Sarah said, her voice low. "It doesn't seem right. What happened?" Pearl blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Miss Thompson." "I've known Junior Holloway since he was a student in my classroom," Sarah continued. "Let's just say I wouldn't put such behavior past him." She squeezed Pearl's arm. "Not everyone believes what was said about you." The unexpected support brought a lump to Pearl's throat. "That means a great deal." After completing her deliveries, during which Mr. Peterson had been coldly formal, while Mrs. Landry had been unexpectedly kind, Pearl found herself drawn to Hammond's general store. She hesitated outside, gathering her courage before pushing open the door. The bell jingled cheerfully, belying the tension that filled the shop as Mr. Hammond looked up from behind the counter. His expression shifted from shopkeeper's welcome to recognition, and then discomfort. "Miss Whitmore," he said stiffly. "Mr. Hammond," Pearl replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I would like to speak with you about what happened yesterday." The store owner glanced around nervously. They were alone in the shop, but windows faced the street where anyone might observe their conversation. "There's nothing to discuss," he said. "The mayor handled the situation." Pearl took a deep breath. "Mr. Hammond, I have been coming to your store since I was a child. My mother and I have always paid our way. I did not take that ribbon." Hammond's gaze darted away. "The mayor's son saw you." "The mayor's son lied," Pearl stated firmly, "and I think you know that." The shopkeeper's shoulders slumped slightly. "Miss Whitmore, I have a business to run. The Holloways hold considerable influence in this town, and that's worth more than the truth." Before Hammond could answer, the bell jingled again as the door opened. Clint Sutherland stepped inside, his imposing frame filling the doorway. "Miss Whitmore," he said with a tip of his hat. "Mr. Hammond." His eyes took in the scene, understanding dawning in them. "Is everything all right here?" Hammond straightened. "Mr. Sutherland, just a misunderstanding being cleared up." "Is that so?" Clint moved to stand beside Pearl, his presence offering silent support. Hammond cleared his throat nervously. "Well, perhaps there was some confusion yesterday. In the bustle of a busy shop, it's possible that items might get misplaced." He looked at Pearl. "If you say you didn't take the ribbon, Miss Whitmore, then perhaps we should give you the benefit of the doubt." It wasn't the full vindication Pearl had hoped for, but it was something. "Thank you, Mr. Hammond, I appreciate that." The shopkeeper nodded awkwardly. "Will there be anything else today?" "No, thank you," Pearl replied, turning to leave. Clint followed her outside, falling into step beside her as they walked down the boardwalk. "That was brave," he commented. Pearl glanced up at him. "It didn't accomplish much. More than you might think. Hammond knows the truth, he just doesn't have the courage to stand up to the Holloways. But others will hear that he's changed his tone." They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Pearl spoke again. "What brings you to town today? I thought you'd be busy at your ranch." "I am," Clint admitted. "But I needed supplies and—" He hesitated. "I wanted to make sure you were all right after yesterday." The simple admission warmed her. "That's very kind of you, not kindness, just decent behavior." He paused at the corner where the street led toward her home. "Miss Whitmore, Pearl, I was serious about that rain check on dinner. Would you and your mother allow me to call on you this Sunday?" Pearl felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with yesterday's humiliation. "I think we would like that very much." Clint's smile transformed his serious face. "Until Sunday, then." As Pearl watched him walk away, she realized that the whispers and stares around her seemed less important somehow. "You shine." Perhaps, with time, others would see it too. The days leading up to Sunday passed in a blur of anticipation mixed with lingering unease. Pearl and her mother worked diligently on their sewing orders, but Pearl couldn't help noticing that fewer townspeople seemed to be bringing them work. "It will pass," Martha assured her when Pearl mentioned her concern. "People have short memories when it comes to scandal, especially when a new one comes along." Pearl hoped her mother was right, though the cool reception she'd received at church that morning suggested otherwise. Several families who had previously been friendly had pointedly avoided them, while others had offered only the most perfunctory greetings. By mid-afternoon, Pearl was arranging wildflowers on the table while Martha prepared a rabbit stew that had been simmering all day. "Do you think he's courting?" Martha asked casually as she checked the biscuits baking in the oven. Pearl nearly dropped the flowers. "Mother, he's just being neighborly." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Clint Sutherland has been in Evanston for 3 years and hasn't been neighborly to anyone that I recall. He's kept to himself since arriving from Montana." Before Pearl could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Her heart jumped as she smoothed her dress, her best one, a soft green calico that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Clint stood on their porch, hat in hand, freshly shaven and wearing a clean blue shirt that matched his eyes. In his free hand, he held a small burlap sack. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted Pearl with a smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for having me. Please come in." Martha welcomed him warmly. Clint stepped inside, presenting the sack to Martha. "Coffee beans from the latest shipment. They arrived on yesterday's train." "How thoughtful!" Martha exclaimed, accepting the gift. "And perfect timing, we were just down to the last of ours." The small cabin filled with easy conversation as they sat down to dinner. Clint complimented the stew generously, and Pearl found herself watching him as he spoke with her mother about the upcoming harvest season and the changes in the territory since Wyoming's organization as a territory in 1868. "Things are changing fast," Clint remarked. "The railroads brought more people, more opportunities, but also more complications." "Like the tensions with the remaining native tribes?" Martha asked. Clint nodded. "Among other things. The cattle operations are growing, pushing against the smaller homesteads. And now there's talk of Wyoming becoming a state in the next few years." "Would that be good for Evanston?" Pearl asked. "Could be. Statehood brings more stability, more official law, might put an end to some of the more." He searched for the right word, arbitrary justice we sometimes see. Pearl understood his meaning immediately. Men like Mayor Holloway would have less unchecked power. As the meal progressed, Pearl was struck by how comfortable it felt having Clint in their home, as if he somehow belonged at their table. He helped clear the dishes despite Martha's protests, and when Martha excused herself to check on a neighbor who had been ill, leaving the two of them alone, Pearl found herself uncharacteristically nervous. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," Clint said as they sat in the small sitting area. "Raising you alone, building a business," Pearl nodded. "She is. My father died when I was 7, pneumonia. She never remarried, just focused on making a life for us." "And you? What do you focus on?" Pearl considered the question. "Helping mother mostly, learning the business." "I'm good with the finer embroidery work." She paused. "I used to dream of teaching like Miss Thompson, but that requires more schooling than we could afford." "Dreams have a way of finding new paths," Clint observed. "What about you?" Pearl asked. "What brought you to Evanston from Montana?" A shadow crossed Clint's face. "A fresh start. I worked my uncle's ranch up north until he passed. There was some trouble with his business partner who thought he should inherit everything. When the dust settled, I took what was rightfully mine and came south." "That sounds difficult." "It was," he admitted, "but necessary. Some situations you can't fix, you can only walk away from them." Something in his tone made Pearl wonder if he was thinking about her predicament with the Holloways. "Is that what you think I should do? Walk away?" Clint studied her thoughtfully. "I think you're stronger than you realize, Pearl. And I think this town would be poorer without you in it." When Martha returned, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Pearl found herself continually drawn to Clint's gaze. There was something there, a recognition, a connection that made her feel truly seen. As evening approached, Clint reluctantly rose to leave. "I've kept you ladies long enough. I have an early start tomorrow." "It was our pleasure," Martha assured him. "You're welcome anytime." At the door, Clint turned to Pearl. "I wonder if you might allow me to call on you again. Perhaps a ride on Saturday if the weather holds. Pearl felt her cheeks warm. I would like that. Until Saturday, then. He tipped his hat and stepped into the gathering dusk. As Pearl closed the door, she found her mother watching her with a knowing smile. "Not courting, you said," Martha teased. Pearl laughed softly. "Perhaps I was mistaken." The week passed with agonizing slowness. Pearl found herself watching the road each time she worked near the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of Clint riding past. Meanwhile, the aftermath of her public shaming continued to ripple through her daily interactions with townsfolk. On Thursday, Mrs. Holloway herself entered their small shop adjacent to their home, where Martha and Pearl conducted their sewing business. The mayor's wife, a thin woman with perpetually pinched features, glanced around the modest space with barely concealed disdain. "Mrs. Whitmore," she acknowledged with a stiff nod. "I've come about the alterations to my dinner gown. I'll be needing it for the territorial representative's visit next week." Martha maintained a professional demeanor. "Of course. I've completed the adjustments you requested. Pearl, would you fetch Mrs. Holloway's dress?" Pearl moved to retrieve the garment from the back room, feeling Mrs. Holloway's critical gaze following her. "I must say, I was surprised you'd still want our services," Martha commented mildly as she waited. Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "No one else in town has your skill with French seaming, Mrs. Whitmore. One must separate business from other matters." Pearl returned with the carefully wrapped dress, a deep burgundy silk that had required meticulous work to adjust the bodice and hemline. As Mrs. Holloway inspected the alterations, she spoke without looking up. "I understand Clint Sutherland called on your home this weekend." The statement, delivered as a casual observation, carried unmistakable undertones of disapproval. "Mr. Sutherland joined us for Sunday dinner, yes," Martha replied evenly. "How interesting. He rarely socializes in town." Mrs. Holloway folded the dress over her arm. "You might wish to be cautious about such associations given recent events. People do talk." Pearl felt her spine stiffen. "Mr. Sutherland is a respected rancher," she said before she could stop herself. Mrs. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Respected by some, perhaps. My husband finds his independent streak problematic." She placed coins on the counter. "The work is satisfactory. Good day." After she left, Martha sighed. "That woman has always been insufferable." "She was warning us away from Clint," Pearl said, troubled. "Why would the Holloways care who calls on me?" "Because you stood up to them, dear. And because Clint took your side publicly." Martha touched her daughter's cheek gently. "That makes both of you dangerous in their eyes." Saturday dawned clear and mild, perfect for riding. Pearl dressed carefully in her riding skirt, a practical garment that had caused some raised eyebrows when she first wore it in town, instead of riding side saddle in a proper dress. Clint arrived precisely at 10, leading a second horse alongside his own chestnut stallion. "This is Daisy," he said, introducing the gentle, dapple gray mare. "She belongs to my foreman's wife, but she's happy to let you borrow her." Pearl stroked the mare's velvety nose. "She's beautiful." With practiced ease, Clint helped Pearl mount, his strong hands respectfully supporting her waist. The brief contact sent a flutter through her chest. They rode at a leisurely pace out of town, following the river that wound through the valley below Evanston. Pearl was acutely aware of curious eyes watching from windows and porches as they passed. "I think we're causing quite a stir," she commented. Clint's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Good. Gives them something new to talk about." Once beyond the town limits, they followed a trail that climbed gradually into the rolling hills. Wildflowers dotted the spring grass, and the air carried the scent of sage and pine. "I've never been this way before," Pearl admitted as they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The vista below was breathtaking, advanced and nestled against the river, surrounded by mountains still capped with snow despite the late spring warmth. "This is one of my favorite spots," Clint said, dismounting and helping Pearl down. "I come here to think sometimes." They secured the horses to a nearby tree and settled on a flat rock overlooking the valley. Pearl closed her eyes briefly, feeling the sun on her face and the gentle breeze playing with escaped tendrils of her auburn hair. "Mrs. Holloway came to our shop yesterday," Pearl said after a comfortable silence. "She seemed concerned about your visit to our home." Clint chuckled without humor. "I'm sure she was. She implied that her husband finds you problematic. The feeling is mutual." Clint picked up a small stone, turning it in his fingers. "Holloway and I have had our differences since I arrived in Evanston. He tried to pressure me into selling water rights to a parcel of my land rights that would have given him control over access for several smaller ranches downstream. And you refused." "I did." Clint tossed the stone, watching it bounce down the slope. "Those smaller operations depend on that water. Holloway would have charged them fees they couldn't afford, driven them out eventually." Pearl studied his profile, the strong jaw and serious eyes. "You stood up for them." "I stood up for what was right," he corrected. "Just like you did at Hammond's store." Their eyes met, and Pearl felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had begun the day he'd walked her home. "Why did you really help me that day?" she asked softly. Clint was quiet for a long moment. "I'd noticed you before at church in town. You always seemed, I don't know, different somehow. The way you carried yourself, the kindness in your interactions." He looked away, almost embarrassed. "When I saw what was happening in the square, how they were treating you, it wasn't just that I knew you were innocent. It was that I couldn't bear to see your light dimmed by their cruelty." The honesty in his words touched Pearl deeply. "No one has ever seen me that way before." "Then they haven't been looking properly," Clint said simply. Impulsively, Pearl reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you." His larger hand turned, fingers intertwining with hers. The simple contact felt more intimate than any embrace. They sat like that for several minutes, watching clouds cast moving shadows across the valley below, before Clint spoke again. "Pearl, I should tell you being seen with me might not make things easier for you in town. The Holloways have influence and they're not above using it." "I'm already the girl who was accused of stealing in the town square," Pearl replied with newfound determination. "What more can they do?" Clint's expression grew serious. "They could make life difficult for your mother's business, for you. And would that stop you from calling on me?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Not a chance." "Then we understand each other," Pearl said, returning his smile. They spent the afternoon exploring the hills, Clint pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the territory's history. When they finally turned back toward town, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. As they approached Pearl's home, Clint slowed his horse. "I'd like to ask your mother's permission to court you properly," he said, his direct manner both startling and thrilling Pearl. "Are you certain?" she asked. "It's only been a week since we've really spoken." "I'm certain of what I feel," Clint replied, "and of what I see in you. The rest we can discover together if you're willing." Pearl's heart beat faster. "I'm willing." Martha received Clint's formal request with barely concealed delight, giving her blessing readily. As spring deepened into summer, Clint became a regular visitor at the Whitmore home. Twice weekly, he would call on Pearl, sometimes for rides into the countryside, other times for simple evenings of conversation on the porch. The town's reaction was predictably mixed. Some, like Sarah Thompson and the minister's wife, openly approved of the match. Others, particularly those in the Holloway social circle, made their disapproval evident through cold greetings and pointed remarks. Pearl found that with Clint's steady presence in her life, such pettiness affected her less than it once might have. His belief in her, his unwavering support, gave her a confidence she'd never before possessed. One warm July evening, as they walked along the river after a community picnic, Clint broached a subject they'd been circling for weeks. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, his voice thoughtful as they paused beneath a cottonwood tree. "My ranch is doing well, but I've been working alone too long. A man needs more than just land and cattle to build a life worth living." Pearl's heart quickened. What else does he need? Clint turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. A partner, someone to share the work and the rewards, someone whose light makes even the darkest days brighter. His blue eyes held hers intently. "I love you, Pearl. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing tall despite everything in that town square." Tears of happiness sprang to Pearl's eyes. "I love you too. Then would you consider becoming my wife, building a life together at the ranch?" "Yes," Pearl whispered, her voice strengthening as she repeated, "Yes." Clint's face broke into a radiant smile as he drew her close, kissing her with a gentle passion that spoke of promises and tomorrows. When they finally parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "You've made me the happiest man in the Wyoming territory," he murmured. Their announcement was met with genuine joy from Martha and congratulations from their true friends in town. Plans were made for a September wedding, allowing time for necessary preparations while avoiding the busy harvest season. 3 weeks before the wedding, however, trouble arrived in the form of Junior Holloway. Pearl was leaving the post office when the mayor's son stepped into her path, his expression unpleasantly smug. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted her with mock courtesy. "Or soon to be Mrs. Sutherland, I hear." Pearl nodded stiffly. "Mr. Holloway." She attempted to step around him, but he moved to block her way. "I must say, you've done well for yourself. From accused thief to rancher's wife in a matter of months. Quite the advancement." "Excuse me," Pearl said firmly, refusing to engage with his baiting. Junior leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You know, it's not too late to reconsider. A word from me to my father could still clear your name completely. All it would take is a little friendliness on your part." Disgust filled Pearl. "I would rather be falsely branded a thief for the rest of my life than spend 1 minute in your company, Mr. Holloway." His face darkened with anger. "You'll regret that. My father and I aren't finished with your precious Clint Sutherland. When we're done, you'll wish you'd been more accommodating. Is there a problem here?" The familiar voice came from behind Pearl. She turned to see Clint approaching, his expression thunderous as he took in the scene. Junior straightened, though he couldn't match Clint's height or presence. "No problem at all, Sutherland. Just congratulating the lady on her fortunate match." "Then I'm sure you're finished," Clint said coldly, offering his arm to Pearl. "Shall we, darling?" As they walked away, Pearl could feel Junior's eyes burning into her back. "He threatened you," she said quietly once they were out of earshot. "He's been threatening me for years," Clint replied grimly. "Empty words." This felt different. "He mentioned his father said they weren't finished with you." Clint's jaw tightened. "Don't worry about the Holloways. They're all bluster." But Pearl couldn't shake the feeling that Junior's words had been more than idle threats. That night, she shared her concerns with her mother. "Clint says not to worry," but there was something in Junior's manner. Martha looked troubled. "The Holloways have always used their position to get their way. If they feel challenged, they might indeed try something." "But what? Clint's land is rightfully his. His business is successful." "Perhaps you should speak with Sheriff Davis," Martha suggested, "just to make him aware of the threat." Pearl nodded slowly. "That might be wise." The The next morning, Pearl visited the sheriff's office. The aging lawman listened attentively to her account of Junior's words. "Can't arrest a man for making vague threats, Miss Whitmore," he said when she'd finished. "But I appreciate you bringing it to my attention. I'll keep an eye on the situation." As Pearl was leaving, Sheriff Davis added, "For what it's worth, I never believed you took that ribbon. Junior Holloway has been trouble since he was a boy." His words offered small comfort as Pearl made her way to Hammond's store for supplies. She was selecting fabric for her wedding dress when the door opened, and Mayor Holloway himself entered, accompanied by a stranger in an expensive suit. "Ah, Miss Whitmore," the mayor said with artificial joviality. "Allow me to introduce Mr. Blackburn from the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne." Pearl nodded politely, instantly wary. "Gentlemen, Miss Whitmore is engaged to Clint Sutherland," Holloway informed Blackburn. "The very rancher we were discussing." Blackburn's eyebrows rose. "Indeed. Then perhaps Miss Whitmore might know whether Mr. Sutherland has received our letters regarding his deed verification." Pearl maintained a neutral expression despite her confusion. "I couldn't say, sir." "You would need to speak with Mr. Sutherland directly." "We've attempted to do so," Blackburn said smoothly. "He has been unresponsive to official correspondence." "Which is concerning," Holloway added with poorly disguised satisfaction. "Especially given the questions about the legitimacy of his claim to the property." Pearl's heart raced. "What questions?" "Clint inherited that land legally from his uncle." Blackburn and Holloway exchanged glances. "There appear to be irregularities in the transfer documents," Blackburn explained. "Nothing that can't be cleared up, I'm sure, with Mr. Sutherland's cooperation." The implication was clear. Pearl thanked the shopkeeper hastily and hurried from the store, abandoning her purchases in her rush to find Clint. He was at the blacksmith's when she located him, discussing repairs to a broken wagon wheel. His face darkened as she related the encounter. "Damn them," he muttered when she finished. "I should have known they'd try something like this." "Then it's true. There's a problem with your land claim." Clint ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "No, there's no problem. My uncle's will was properly executed. The deed transfer was registered with the land office in Montana and recognized when I registered here." "Then, why is someone from the territorial office questioning it?" "Because Holloway has friends in the territorial government," Clint explained grimly. "He's called in favors to create problems where none exist." Pearl felt sick with worry. "What can you do?" "Fight it. I have all the original documents. My lawyer in Cheyenne can verify everything." He took her hand reassuringly. "This is just harassment, Pearl. They're trying to pressure me to get to you. To punish us both," she corrected. Clint nodded soberly. "That too." In the following days, the situation escalated. Official-looking notices were posted at the land office, questioning Clint's ownership. Rumors spread through town that he might lose his ranch, rumors that Holloway did nothing to dispel when questioned. Clint rode to Cheyenne to meet with his lawyer and the legitimate officials at the Territorial Land Office. During his 3-day absence, Pearl endured pitying looks and whispered comments whenever she ventured into town. "Poor thing," she overheard Mrs. Porter saying to another woman at church. "Engaged to a man who might lose everything. First the stealing accusation, now this. The Whitmore girl does seem to attract trouble." Pearl held her head high, refusing to show how deeply the words stung. She focused instead on preparing for Clint's return, hoping he would bring favorable news. When he finally rode in on the third evening, the set of his shoulders told Pearl everything she needed to know even before he spoke. "It's worse than I thought," he admitted as they sat on her porch. "Holloway has been working on this for months. He's had someone forge documents suggesting my uncle sold the land before his death." Pearl gasped. That's criminal. It is, but proving it will be difficult. The forger did good work, and the supposed buyer conveniently sold the land to a company partly owned by Holloway. What did your lawyer say? That we can fight it, but it will take time and money. Meanwhile, there could be an injunction preventing me from using or selling the property until the case is resolved. Pearl took his hand. What can I do? Clint's expression softened as he looked at her. You're already doing it. Standing with me means more than you know. Martha, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped onto the porch. You'll both stay for dinner, Clint. We need to discuss this as a family. Over Martha's rabbit stew, they considered options. Martha was practical and clear-eyed. If they can tie up the ranch in legal proceedings, they win even if you eventually prove your case, she observed. You'd be drained financially in the meantime. Clint nodded grimly. That's their strategy. Then perhaps a different approach is needed, Martha suggested. One they won't expect. Pearl looked at her mother curiously. What do you mean? A determined gleam appeared in Martha's eyes. I mean we need to change the battlefield, fight on ground of our choosing, not theirs. For the first time since his return, Clint smiled. Mrs. Whitmore, I believe you have the makings of a fine strategist. Martha's plan was both simple and daring. Instead of waiting for Holloway's legal maneuvers to progress, they would act first. The wedding would be moved up to the following Sunday. Immediately afterward, Pearl and Martha would publicly transfer ownership of their modest property to Clint, giving him an uncontestable business address in town from which to operate while the ranch dispute was resolved. It's not much, Martha acknowledged, but it's been fully paid for since your father died, Pearl. The deed is clear. They can't touch it. But, Mother, it's your home, Pearl protested. Our home, Martha corrected. And soon Clint's home, too. This way, no matter what happens with the ranch, they can't leave him with nothing. Pearl looked at Clint, seeing the conflict in his eyes. I can't ask you to give up your property, he began. You're not asking, Martha interrupted firmly. We're offering. Family stands together, Clint. And like it or not, you're family now. The hastily rearranged wedding plans created a stir in town. Some speculated that Pearl was with child, a rumor she endured with as much grace as she could muster. Others, who knew of Holloway's machinations, recognized the strategic move for what it was and admired the couple's resolve. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Pearl wore a cream-colored dress that she and her mother had worked on day and night to complete. Sarah Thompson hosted the small reception at her home, providing a neutral ground where even those cautious of offending the Holloways could attend without fear of reprisal. Clint's eyes never left Pearl throughout the ceremony, his voice steady and sure as he spoke his vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering of true friends erupted in genuine applause. Mrs. Sutherland, Clint whispered as he kissed her, the name a promise on his lips. After the reception, they returned to what was now their town home. The property transfer had been completed that morning with the county clerk, a move that had already reached Holloway's ears, judging by his thunderous expression when they'd passed him in the street. It won't stop him entirely, Clint cautioned as they sat together that evening. But it buys us time and gives us a secure foundation. Pearl leaned her head against his shoulder, still marveling at the reality of being his wife. We'll face whatever comes together. Martha had tactfully arranged to stay with a friend for 2 days, giving the newlyweds privacy in the small cabin. As darkness fell, Pearl felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation about their first night as husband and wife. Clint seemed to sense her thoughts. We have all the time in the world, he assured her gently. There's no rush. But as they retired to the bedroom that had once been Pearl's alone, she found her nervousness melting away beneath his tender gaze. His touch was reverent as he helped her with the buttons of her dress, his kisses increasingly passionate as they discovered each other. In the quiet afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Pearl felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. "I love you," Clint murmured against her hair. "Whatever happens with the ranch, with the Holloways, none of it matters as long as we're together." Pearl knew in that moment that she would fight alongside this man against any challenge the world might throw at them. "We're stronger together," she whispered back. "They'll discover that soon enough." The Holloway's reaction to the marriage and property transfer was swift and vindictive. Within days, Martha and Pearl lost several longtime sewing clients who had connections to the mayor's family. The Territorial Land Office representative returned, this time with paperwork seeking to place an injunction on Clint's ranch operations pending resolution of the ownership dispute. "They're escalating," Clint observed grimly after the man left. "Holloway won't be satisfied until he breaks us." Pearl had been contemplating an idea since their wedding night. "Then perhaps we need to break him first." Clint looked at her curiously. "What are you thinking? Junior Holloway falsely accused me of theft. We know that. But what if there were a way to prove it? To expose both him and his father publicly? We have no evidence," Clint pointed out. "It would be our word against theirs." Pearl's expression grew determined. "Then we need to find evidence, or create a situation where they expose themselves." The plan that emerged was risky but potentially effective. Pearl would return to Hammond's store, ostensibly to purchase supplies. While there, she would ensure that Junior Holloway, who often loitered in his father's businesses around town, saw her. Clint would be nearby but not obviously present. If Junior took the bait and attempted to plant another item on her or make another false accusation, Clint would be ready with witnesses. Martha was hesitant. "It's dangerous to provoke them further." "We're already their targets," Pearl argued. "At least this way we choose the battlefield, as you said." Reluctantly, Martha agreed. 2 days later, Pearl entered Hammond's store, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She browsed the fabric section, taking her time, aware of the bell jingling as other customers came and went. Her patience was rewarded when Junior Holloway sauntered in, affecting surprise at seeing her. "Mrs. Sutherland," he drawled, emphasizing her new name mockingly. "Shopping for your establishment?" Pearl kept her voice steady. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway." "Yes, we need supplies for upcoming orders." Junior moved closer, his voice dropping. "I hear your husband's having some trouble with his property claim. Terrible shame." "These things have a way of resolving themselves," Pearl replied evenly, selecting a bolt of blue cotton. "Truth has a way of coming to light." Something in her tone must have alerted Junior that her words carried a double meaning. His eyes narrowed. "Some truths are better left buried, Mrs. Sutherland, for everyone's sake." Pearl turned to face him directly. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Holloway?" "Merely offering friendly advice." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "After all, your reputation is still recovering. It would be a shame if further incidents occurred." Pearl felt a surge of triumph. He was playing directly into their hands. Incidents like being falsely accused of theft. Junior's smile vanished. "I saw what I saw that day. Did you? Or did you see an opportunity to punish a woman who had rejected your advances?" His face darkened with anger. "You should be careful with such accusations." "Why? Because they're true." Pearl pressed, aware that Mr. Hammond and another customer were now watching their exchange. "You planted that ribbon in my basket after I refused to meet you behind the church, as you'd suggested. Then you created a scene to humiliate me publicly." Junior's hand shot out, gripping her wrist painfully. "You have no proof of that." "Actually, she does." Sheriff Davis stepped from behind a display where he'd been positioned out of sight. Beside him stood Clint and Mr. Hammond, both grim-faced. "Threatening a woman in public view, Mr. Holloway," the sheriff said, nodding toward Junior's hand still clamped around Pearl's wrist. "That's not behavior befitting the mayor's son." Junior released Pearl immediately, his face flushing. "This is a misunderstanding." "Is it?" Sheriff Davis pulled out a small notebook. "Because I've been receiving some interesting reports lately. Mrs. Thompson mentioned that she observed you following Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Sutherland, now on several occasions before the theft accusation. And Mr. Hammond here has been having second thoughts about what he really saw that day." Hammond stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "I didn't actually see Mrs. Sutherland take anything. I only responded to your accusation." Junior backed away, looking trapped. "This is absurd." Your father isn't above the law," Sheriff Davis interrupted firmly. "And neither are you. Now, I think we need to continue this conversation at my office." As the sheriff escorted a protesting Junior from the store, Pearl felt Clint's steadying hand on her shoulder. "You were magnificent," he murmured, "and braver than I was comfortable with." Pearl leaned into his strength. "It was worth the risk." The aftermath unfolded more dramatically than they could have anticipated. Junior, when confronted with statements from multiple witnesses about his behavior toward Pearl, broke down and admitted to fabricating the theft accusation out of spite. This confession, combined with documents Clint's lawyer uncovered suggesting Mayor Holloway's involvement in the forged land transfer papers, created a scandal that rocked Evanston. The territorial governor, already concerned about reports of corruption, dispatched investigators. Within weeks, both Holloways faced serious charges. The mayor was forced to resign, and the land dispute was resolved firmly in Clint's favor, with official apologies from the Territorial Land Office. As winter approached, Pearl and Clint divided their time between the town property and the ranch. Martha had moved into the ranch house with them, establishing a sewing room where she continued the business with Pearl's help. On a crisp December evening, as they sat before the fireplace in the ranch's comfortable main room, Clint took Pearl's hand. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to his office. On his desk lay architectural drawings. "What do you think?" Pearl studied the plans, recognizing an expansion of the ranch house, additional bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a dedicated space for the sewing business. "It's wonderful," she breathed. "But why so much space?" Clint's eyes shone with hope and love. "Because I thought we might need room to grow. A family needs space." Pearl's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. She had been waiting for the right moment to share her suspicion, now certainty that their family would indeed be growing by summer's end. "In that case," she said, a smile blooming on her face, "your timing is perfect." Clint's expression shifted from confusion to dawning understanding. "Pearl, are you saying?" She nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. "By July, if the doctor's estimate is correct." With a whoop of delight, Clint lifted her into his arms, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently back on her feet and kissing her with tender passion. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "My shining star." Spring brought new growth to both the land and their lives. The ranch flourished under Clint's careful management, while Pearl and Martha's sewing business expanded to include orders from as far away as Cheyenne. Pearl's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her growing belly a source of pride and joy for Clint, who insisted on handling increasingly more of her chores despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. "You're carrying our future," he would say, kissing her forehead. "Let me carry the water bucket." In town, the Sutherlands were now respected figures. The scandal involving the Holloways had cleared Pearl's name completely, and many who had been quick to believe the worst now sought to make amends. Pearl accepted their renewed friendships graciously, having learned that forgiveness lightened her own heart as much as it relieved others' guilt. Junior Holloway had left Evanston, sent by his disgraced father to relatives in Denver. The former mayor himself remained in town, but was much diminished in stature and influence. On a warm July evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance promising a summer storm, Pearl felt the first contractions. Martha, who had experienced helping many women through childbirth, recognized immediately what was happening. "It's time to fetch the doctor," she told Clint, who had been reading by the fire. His book fell forgotten as he leapt to his feet. "All ready, but it's 2 weeks early." "Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them," Martha said calmly, already gathering clean linens. "Now hurry, but be careful in the dark." The night that followed was long and difficult. The storm broke just as Clint returned with Dr. Wilson, forcing them to rush through sheets of rain into the house. Pearl's labor progressed steadily but slowly, each contraction drawing strength she wasn't sure she possessed. Through it all, Clint remained by her side, wiping her brow, speaking words of encouragement, his steadfast presence anchoring her through waves of pain. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her as dawn approached and her exhaustion deepened. "You can do this, Pearl. You've faced down worse than childbirth." His unwavering faith gave her renewed determination. With a final, tremendous effort as the first rays of sunlight pierced the storm clouds, Pearl brought their son into the world, a boy. Dr. Wilson announced, his voice revealing his own fatigue and satisfaction. "A fine, strong boy." Tears streamed down Clint's face as the doctor placed the squalling infant in Pearl's arms. "He's perfect," Clint whispered, gently touching the tiny fingers that curled reflexively around his own larger one. "Just like his mother." They named him Matthew Charles Sutherland, honoring both Pearl's father and Clint's uncle. Martha, observing her daughter's radiant face as she held her newborn son, remarked that she had never seen Pearl shine so brightly. "She's always shone," Clint replied softly. "I just had the good fortune to notice it first." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The harsh Wyoming winters tested even the most prepared ranchers, and the boom and bust cycles of the cattle industry required constant adaptation. But through it all, Pearl and Clint faced each obstacle together, their partnership strengthening with each trial overcome. Matthew grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quiet determination. When he was 3, he welcomed a sister, Emma Rose, whose arrival coincided with Wyoming statehood in 1890, a fact that Clint liked to mention whenever he introduced his daughter to new acquaintances. "Born with the state itself," he would say proudly. "A true Wyoming woman." The sewing business evolved as well. Pearl, drawing on her natural talent for design, began creating patterns that she sold to women throughout the territory. Her practical riding skirts became particularly popular, representing a small but significant step toward greater freedom for women in the West. Martha, watching her daughter's family and business grow, often reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that terrible day in the town square. What had seemed like the worst moment of Pearl's life had ultimately led to her greatest happiness. On a crisp autumn day in 1893, the family gathered on the porch of their expanded ranch house. 8-year-old Matthew was showing his 5-year-old sister how to whittle a stick under their father's watchful eye, while Pearl and Martha sorted the season's last wildflowers for pressing. "We're expecting visitors tomorrow," Clint announced. "The new territorial representative wants to see some successful ranching operations. Ours was recommended." Pearl smiled. "How far we've come from being the town scandal." You were never a scandal, Martha corrected firmly. Just a light temporarily hidden under the bushel of others' misdeeds. Matthew looked up from his whittling. Pa says Mama glows like a lantern in the dark. Does he now? Pearl asked, raising an eyebrow at her husband. Clint shrugged, unrepentant. I told him the story of how we met. How I knew you were special because you shone even when others tried to dim your light. Emma, always attentive to her father's words, piped up. Tell the story again, Papa, about when you saved Mama in the town square. I didn't save her, Clint corrected gently. Your mother saved herself with her courage and dignity. I just had the good sense to recognize what a remarkable woman she was. Pearl reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of long partnership. We saved each other, she said softly. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery golds and pinks, Pearl looked around at her family, at the life built from the ashes of humiliation. She thought of the young woman she had been, standing alone and shamed in the town square, and wished she could tell that frightened girl what lay ahead. Not just the love of a good man, but the discovery of her own strength, the building of a legacy, the creation of a family bound by more than blood. What are you thinking? Clint asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Pearl smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. I was thinking about light, how it finds ways to shine through even the darkest moments. Clint nodded, understanding as he always did. And how sometimes it shines brightest after the storm. Their eyes met in perfect comprehension, a language developed through years of shared struggles and triumphs. Around them, their children's laughter mingled with the evening birdsong, a melody of the life they had created together. In that moment, Pearl knew with absolute certainty that her light had never been in danger of extinguishing, not in the town square, not during the battle with the Holloways, not through any hardship they had faced or would face. For true light, she had learned, doesn't depend on others' recognition to shine. It burns from within, steady and sure, illuminating not just one's own path but the way forward for others. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the Sutherland family remained on their porch, bound together in the warm circle of light they had created, a light that had begun with a simple act of kindness and the words that had changed everything. You shine.